The Kim family grand dining hall was filled with the laughter, the clicking of the glass, and endless conversation. Wine sat beside them, smiling politely, trying to her best to fit into the elegant atmosphere. Uncle leaned forward with a kind smile. So, Wine, how are you adjusting to our family? It must feel overwhelming sometime. Wine smiled softly. It's been lovely. Everyone has been very kind. I am still learning, but I am grateful. A few family members nodded, but then Taehyung's cousin leaned back with a smirk. Still learning. Of course, you didn't exactly grow up in this kind of environment, did you? The table chuckled lightly. Wine smiled flattered for a second, but she quickly fixed it, lowering her gaze. Another cousin raised his glass, voiceless with mockery. She doesn't really seems like she belongs in this family, right? The laughter quiet. Everyone waited for his reaction. Wine turned to her husband, eyes searching his face, slightly pleading for him to say something, anything. But Taehyung smiley lifted his wine glass, took a calm sip and set it down again. His face remained cold, unreadable, as if the comment didn't matter. Wine's heart dropped. She forced a smile and looked down at her plate, blinking rapidly to hide the sting in her eyes. The conversation around the table picked up again, but for Wine everything had already changed. The car ride home was quiet, too quiet. Tim kept his eyes on the road, one hand on the wheel, the other teasing casually on his lap. Normally, Wine would be chatting about the dinner, pointing out the smallest thing she noticed, but tonight nothing. He glared at her briefly. She sat with her arms across, staring out the window, her expression unreadable. You are awful quiet. No response. Tired, no response. She kept her gaze outside, he announced softly, turning his attention to the road. Fine, don't talk. At home, Wine moved around like he wasn't even there. She sat dinner on the table, but Dean invited him to sit. She carried her things into the bedroom, brushed past him without a word, and slipped into bed. Taehyung stood the doorway, forming. Really? You are going to ignore me now? She didn't answer, pulled the blanket over her shoulder, her back turning to him. For a moment, he just stood there, his jaw tightened. He was used to her voice, filling the silence, used to her gentle caution and a small smile. But now the cold wall she put between them and made the room feel heavier than ever. Muttered to himself, unbelievable. He climbed into bed, leaving a wide space between them. Still, his eyes leaning on her back for a long while before he finally closed his eyes. The silence stretched between them like a knife. The next morning, the house was too quiet. Again, Wine moved around the kitchen, cooking breakfast as if Taehyung didn't exist. She set his plate in front of him, then turned away without a word. Taehyung stared at the food, then at her bag. His frown grew fond. Are you seriously still ignoring me? Wine picked up her own plate, sat at the fastest chair, and ate in silence. Unbelievable. You are acting like a child. Still no response. His jaw tightened, but something in his chest felt strange, empty. He cleared his throat loudly, waiting for her to ask if he was okay. She didn't even flinch. day he tried again. When Wine went to fold loudly, Taehyung suddenly appeared at the doorway leaning on the frame. So I am invisible now. Wine continued folding clothes, not a word. He narrowed his eyes. Fine, if you want childish, I will give you childish. Later, when Wine walked into living room, she found sticky note platter on the coffee table, the sofa, even the TV. Talk to me, ignoring me won't work. I know you miss me. Wine fought back a laugh, biting her lips. When she walked past him, Taehyung let out an exhausted coughing his chest. I think I'm dying. She shot him a flat look, then walked away. Tim dropped at the active groaning. Are you 5? How long you are going to keep this up? But when she disappeared into the other room without saying a word, he ran his hand through his hair in frustration. For the first time, the cold, stocky, unreadable was one restless begging for her attention.